Well, it's Friday once again, and you know what that means. We have to talk about our liberation. Today, we're talking about what we can do to make sure that our children are fully educated on their heritage, their legacy, the contributions of African Americans, so that they grow up prepared and armed to lead in the country that doesn't want them to lead on today's Freedom Friday.
It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free.
Welcome, friends and family. It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you'll be freer after this hour with my guest today and me. Today, we have a very special guest joining us, someone who is dedicated to promoting knowledge and empowering young minds, mostly through letters, through education, through words, through schooling, and through the introduction of our young people to their own history and their own culture. I'm thrilled to introduce Rann Miller, an incredible educator and the author of the book Resistance Stories from Black History for Kids, inspiring people and events that every kid should know. This is very important to me because it comes at a time when we are, I think, behind the curve on a fight for the battle of the Black mind. I feel like we are closing Black books and closing Black libraries, closing the Black canon. So we need a guest like Rann Miller today to help us make sense of, one, let's just talk about how do we fight? How do we fight for Black letters? How do we fight for the Black mind, the young Black mind, and to stop the closing of the Black mind? And how do we do it in the world in a context where the majority population holds a lot of the cards, a lot of the political cards of what Americans should learn and where they should learn it and how they should learn it. And we're just fighting for our piece of the pie. Good morning, Mr. Miller. How you doing?
Good morning, sir. I'm doing well. Pleasure to be with you today.
How's that setup fit for you in terms of, does it make, does it capture the framing of where we should be what we should be
I,
talking about?
I think so. I think so. I think the pressure's on to get the answers out today, and it's going to be a struggle. But we're here. We're going to talk about it. We're going to get a little bit freer, as you say.
Well, let's talk about your book. I'm really interested in, number one, as somebody who has deep respect for people that finish a book, because many of us know people or are the people ourselves who attempt a book, and this is such an important one for several reasons. One, I think we always need to be contributing to, defending, and maintaining the Black canon, the best of what we know about ourselves in the world, so that we don't raise any generation that doesn't know themselves. So that's one big part of your book that I just find as astounding. Number two, that you aimed it not necessarily at adults only, but young people. What young people should know. That's a part of the canon that we need to be thinking about. So what went into your approach of, number one, deciding what was most important to put in there and to talk about it?
Yeah. So for me, it was well. I'll start it this way. I was approached after putting an article together for Edutopia, and it was an article just on how to teach Black history beyond Black History Month. And so when I was approached about doing the book, I know I didn't want to do something that had already been done. And no shade, no shot to the Black first, or the Black folks in entertainment and in this and in that, but I wanted to do something a little bit more meaningful. Um, Having had experiences where unfortunately I didn't learn everything that I needed to learn as a kid, growing up in certain spaces, education spaces. I mean, there are things that I learned in Black spaces. And I'm just like, that's what needs to be taught. And the main thing there was resistance. That immediately came to mind. Friends of mine, we've had those kind of conversations. And so I'm like, if I'm going to do this book, we need to talk about resistance. We need to talk about that front and center. And the second piece is, I did not want to start with enslavement. I wanted to talk about the idea of we have a history that spans beyond, our enslavement in this part of the world. So I wanted to look at Africa. I wanted to sort of explore, different ideas on how we got to this place whereby we think that our history is confined to a certain time frame and a certain set of experiences. And so resistance went just deeper than examples of Black people fighting back, African people fighting back. It was the idea of exploring themes and thoughts that we've been, told over time. Like the first chapter of the book, I want to explore mapping and this idea of what maps look like and how places like Africa, even South America, were made to look smaller than Europe, and what that meant and what that means. One of the chapters I even talk about, why was it that Africans were enslaved? That's a question I had as a kid that, no one really could answer. And being able to go back, to your point, into the Black canon, reading works by folks like Dr. John Henrik Clark, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, understanding why Europeans sought after Africans and why Africans did not necessarily see that coming based on just who we were as people, who we are as
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
I think that that stuff is important for young kids to understand as well as adults. But the narrative is always that kids don't need to be confronted with these issues, confronted with these ideas. It'll create some sort of race hate, or, this idea of Black supremacy or anything like that. No, that's not it at all. We know what the research says, and we know that Black children who are taught about Black identity and given pride about who they are as a culture, they succeed in school better than if they hadn't gotten that. So for
Hmm.
me,
Hmm.
leaning on that research, leaning on that history, I thought that it was absolutely important for us to have a text that our children can go to, that we can go to, and supplement some of the things that kids may or may not be getting in school. They should be getting it. We know that they're not all getting it, but I hope that my text can add to that Black canon as a resource for families.
It's funny that you say that students do better when they have this grounding, and our students particularly do better. I think oftentimes Black history is treated as if it's kind of like an aside, and it's a nice to have, but not essential. It doesn't contribute. It's not like, when Ron DeSantis in Florida pushed back on the African American studies uh, um, AP standards that they were
Mhm,
putting through, a curriculum that they were putting through there.
mhm,
One of the justifications he made for doing it was that it didn't have any educational value, right?
mhm.
Which, like, was so shocking. Like, if you think
Yeah,
about all the other AP classes, AP German, AP kind of European, Western civilization, and all that stuff that they have there, it never goes through that type of rigorous review
no,
that
not
the
at all.
AP African American Studies was put through. You mentioned two things I want to come back to. So the first one is this. I'll ask you this. Um, you mentioned why Africa in terms of the slave trade.
Mhm.
Why were they selected, and the why of slavery? Can you just touch on that a little bit? Why was Africa such a good target for slavery, and why didn't they see it coming? That was the other thing that you said. I found that really
Yeah,
interesting. You said they didn't see it coming. That's a
yeah.
huge lesson right there. What was that?
So it really comes down to the idea that European culture, European way of life at the time was just very much competition. Dr. John Henrik Clark talks about how Europe was resource poor, land poor, people poor. And so folks were always trying to compete for resources, everything, whether it's people, land, anything. And in Africa, that wasn't necessarily the case because Africa was a land of plenty. No one had to compete because there were plenty of everything with respect to resources, with respect to the land, to the people. You didn't have that level of competition as you did in Europe. And so when you have Europeans coming to Africa, whether it's to take people out into the new world or to pillage and rape the folks that are there to take back to Europe, it has to do with this level of competition. And so Africans didn't operate in the same sort of ways, didn't have the same norms that Europeans did. They didn't come from a place of competition. And so when there was exploration, there wasn't necessarily this idea, oh, we know what these folks are coming to do. No, no, not necessarily that. Over time, they understood what was happening, right? But in the immediate moment, that wasn't necessarily the thought. And so it's not that African people were naive. And I think that that's an often thought of place as to why this was able to happen throughout history. No, it's just that African people did not operate from the same place as Europeans did historically with respect to exploration. Africans traveled all over the world. We knew that they arrived in the quote unquote New World prior to Europeans. In fact, Africans, of course, arrived in Europe, right? They did all kinds of exploration. However, they did not do it with the same purpose or intent as Europeans did with respect to, imperialism, with respect to colonization, all those sort of things. So, I think that it's critical for us to understand that it wasn't that African people were inadequate and that they were,
Mhm.
inferior as to the reasons why they were enslaved. No, no, it has more to do with the fact that Europeans were competing for resources, competing for people, for land. And so their purpose behind colonization and imperialism went to sort of satisfy this I gotta take for me. And we
Mhm.
understand that in society in Western civilization, it's all about the individual. But we know that African people, indigenous people, people from Asia, our Asian brothers and sisters, there is a communal
Mhm.
aspect to culture over the individual.
Mhm.
And so those are lessons that our kids need to understand, that all kids need to understand to really properly frame how enslavement with Africans came to be.
That's such an important story. Like the frame that you just gave. So you have people in Europe who believe that the world is hostile. They don't have enough. They have
Yeah,
lack. Everything is about lack.
yeah,
So they develop a worldview of scarcity,
that's right.
and a scarcity worldview. We know if we think about any redlined, impoverished place anywhere on the planet Earth, it develops a psychology. If you are black explorers, and let's not call them black because Africa actually is a mixture of all humanity. All
That's right.
humanity came from there. And
That's
if
right.
you have people who are coming from such wealth in terms of resources and in terms of even weather, just
Mm,
like the ability of what you can have,
yeah.
and you go out to the rest of the world. When you go out to the rest of the world, you see lack. You see, oh my God, it's bad out there. The rest of the
Hmm.
world is lacking, but you're coming from a place of abundance. So you're like, oh, the rest of the world is lacking and needs help.
Yeah, yeah.
They're coming from the lack to a place that is rich and wealthy,
Hmm.
and they are saying, how can we get all of this?
That's right.
How can we have all this? How can we take it from them? How can we now someone listening to this is gonna be very upset with me for what I just said, right? Someone's gonna be mad about that framing, but it sounds like you have at least some academic basis for that being part of the different ways that people see the world.
Yeah, yeah. And the cool thing about what I tried to do with the book was, even though it's a book for kids, grades 3 to about 7 or 8, at the back of the book, there is a whole page of notes where you can find the sources where I got my information from. And of course, if we're talking about rigor, if we want to introduce our young people to a level of rigor that would require them to be prepared for college level work, it was important for me to make sure that young people were exposed to the idea of there's a notes page, where people get their information in order to verify what they're saying to be true. The most powerful thing for me, I'm reading this with my son. My son's 11 and in fifth grade, and we're reading through one of the stories, and he sees one of the end notes numbers, and he's like, Dad, what are these numbers? And I'm like, what number are you talking about? He's talking about these little numbers next to the end of the sentence. And so I said,
Mm,
oh, let's go to the back. So we go to the back of the page, and I'm able to have a conversation with him about end notes, and then also be able to have a conversation with him about like this notes where I got the information from. And being an educator, I have access to certain things. I'm able to show him the academic journal articles, and he's looking at them. He's like, yo, that's a lot of stuff to read. You read all that? I'm like, well, I had to skim. There's certain things that I read and things of that nature. So it's an opportunity for me to introduce to him a level of scholarship that I know he's not necessarily getting in school. And no shot of shade, but the reality is that there are some people, some places that don't believe in black genius or the idea that young black children can observe or have access to certain pieces of scholarship and information. And so for me, it's important for black families in particular to have this book, but be able to have conversations about how do we find information? How do we verify that it's true? What are sources? And I
mhm.
think that that's sort of the underlying piece of what I was trying to do, in addition to tell the stories, but I wanted that hidden curriculum to be there. Talk to your kids about this level of scholarship. Talk to your kids about what it means to find this information, how to find this information, how to dig after truth. And so for me, that's just as important as the truth that we actually see in the text.
Mm. Why was resistance such a central feature in the way you wanted to approach this book?
Because I wanted people to understand that Black people, African people, were complicit in their liberation. It wasn't just the idea of white benevolence. I think that that's a story that's often told. White abolitionists, white policymakers who decided to make changes and things of that nature. We have, and I say we, I'm just talking about society in general, have unfairly positioned Black freedom fighters as folks that are begging for their rights, and that's not necessarily the case. There were Black people who positioned strategically their aim to get policymakers and folks to do what they needed to do. It wasn't that these folks benevolently said, "Oh, we're going to do what's right." No, folks had to fight for that. They had to resist for that. They had to push for that. And then, of course, there are African people who took their liberation by the horns, if you will, and they used the sword, they used the gun, they used whatever they needed to liberate themselves. And also, I teach in Camden City in New Jersey. The school where I teach is a mix of African American students and Latino students.
Mhm.
And so it's important for me for all of my students to understand the connections, to understand that, like, yeah, we are African. Particularly for Latino students who are often taught just the European side, maybe the indigenous side, but not really the African side. And so it's important for me for them to understand that. And so in the book, I try to make the connections between, this fight for African liberation, African resistance, and that has to do with not just what's happening or happened in the United States, but also throughout the entirety of the diaspora, introducing that term, that topic, what that means, and being able to see the interconnectedness of who we are as African people and how we continue this fight for resistance. And we see it today, even with some of the leaders around the world in the Caribbean. I'm thinking of, Mia Moore Motley from Barbados. I'm thinking about some of the folks that are in South America, the Afro Latina vice president in Colombia, and these things are they're not happening in isolation. African people are working together, and I wanted to show that theme as well in the book, and this idea of resistance, because we've always resisted.
One of the things that you said earlier was about how you wanted to make sure that we didn't start at the wrong spot in history. It gave me the idea, as you said, that one of our problems is that we segment Black history in ways. We limit it to 1 month in the year, Black History Month.
Yeah.
We limit it to America, the United States. We limit it to 1619 showing up in bondage. One of the things that I've said about the 1619 project that, when I did level criticism against that particular project, my main kind of concern with that project, first of all, there were things in it that needed to be cleaned up. So let's just start there. When you talked about endnotes and rigor and whatnot, 1619 project had some cleaning up to do from the original version. But because I knew that a lot of it came from Lerone Bennett's Before the Mayflower as a book, and that book starts in Africa. It does not start with 1619. That book starts in Africa.
That's right.
When I read that years ago, that led me to go read other things like Chika Anta Diop and others, because I had to learn more about, he started with a summary in Africa. Let me go read more of that. And I thought about 1619 project about the section of history is too limiting, right? If this was the last thing I wanted Black folks to read or white folks to read about our place in civilization and history, that's not the location I would locate it in, right? Now, that's a problematic critique for all kinds of reasons, aside, because it's still an important work. It's still an important work. I just want to say that.
Absolutely.
But it's not, it really is not the work. You have to start this earlier to give people real knowledge of these things. So what you're talking about right now, about the things that we learned about the blessings of Africa and some of the hardships of other places in the world, created ideologies. It created a way of thinking. It created government, different ways of governing and thinking. So I love this idea of resisting. One of the ways of resisting is what you were doing, is writing books and getting the research and getting it to youth, getting young people educated about it. But I wonder if you think, from your perspective as an educator, if you have an idea of what we need to do to make sure that educators are prepared themselves. Because if you're the
Mm.
teacher and you don't know what you know, Rann Miller, um, that feels like a project in itself, to
Yeah.
be able to get the educators. Do you have anything to say about like what we need to be thinking about there?
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. I'll try and keep it brief. I think that the problem that I see, just even in my own work, is that you have a lot of course, we already know that the majority of educators are white, right? And so you're going to find a few camps in that. You're going to find folks who, want to teach it and may not have all the information, but they do what they can with what they have. um, you have those teachers that don't know any of the information, wish that they knew it, and so they play it safe because they don't want to necessarily say the wrong thing. And then you have folks that are like, yeah, whatever, there may be some stuff, but I'm not worried about that, I'm teaching it as I know it. And that can be very frustrating. And then that's just the history teachers. I'm not even talking about the teachers in other content areas
Mm,
that don't even consider the idea of how they confuse, um, not only Black history, but history in general in their work, or even understanding how the history of experiences shape the communities where their students live, and how they can take their content in light of that history of experiences to create lessons and projects and assessments that actually benefit the young people to take what they learn and be empowered to apply it to impact their community in a real way. So I say all of that to say I think that there's a lot of reimagining, if you will,
mhm,
that
mhm,
has to happen with respect to what are we actually teaching, what are we actually assessing, and what do we want the outcomes to be for our young people. And that's broader than just a history classroom conversation. If you hear educators make the conversation piece, the talk of, we want to bring all the areas together, all the content areas together, well, then let's do so, but let's do so with a purpose. Young people want purpose. They understand that there is a purpose, and they want educators to help them get to that place of purpose. Well,
mhm,
that's what curriculum is supposed to do. That's what our content areas are supposed to do, and we're not doing much of that. And so I think that it's going to require a real reshifting, from leaders who are equipped with the possibilities of creating something different, as
mhm.
opposed to just managing and keeping the ship afloat. I know that that's not a great technical answer, but I do think that what we need is just that. We need folks with vision, and we need folks to surround those individuals with vision with the ability to put it on paper, and the audacity and courage to demand that educators do just that.
Mm, mhm. I think along those lines, tell me what you think about this. What I learned with the College Board fiasco,
Hmm.
is how little we control the canon ourselves, and
Hmm.
how little our scholars, because the College Board, which is actually not a public organization, they are a nonprofit, supposedly,
Yeah.
with billions of dollars in profits. I want people to know that just because you call yourself a nonprofit doesn't mean you don't make profits and you're not profit driven.
That's right. That's
Right.
right.
So let's be clear about this.
That's right.
But we don't control the College Board. And the College Board is a hot mess. And actually, they pulled together some very brilliant African American scholars to work on that particular project to create
Hmm.
an African American AP Studies course, of
Hmm.
which some of the best Black minds were overridden by a racist governor who's trying to recreate 1952. Right.
Hmm. That's right.
So you bring together, so that tells me how little power that we have. And that said to me that we had the structures wrong. We have got to stop asking for things that don't have structure and power and democratic governance behind them. So for me, like when Obama was president, Obama had like the Office of African American Excellence and others that he kind of deputized to have some federal power, or at least the bully pulpit from the feds, to create space for us to have to design our own life, right? And I think actually this President Biden, who owns his presidency to African Americans, probably should have a national, federal, something in like what we have given to our Native American folks in their settlement with America. In some ways, the Native Americans got a better settlement.
Hmm.
Their settlement was, here's some land,
That's right.
here's some sovereignty,
Hmm.
here's some funding that will never be touched,
Hmm.
here is some fuel for you to be sovereign and live your own life. That's not a great set. It's not the best settlement ever for having done miserable things to a people, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But it's better than what we got. What we got was, hey, how about if we stop enslaving you for now? And we were like, well, listen, so that means we're not gonna have any more chains, we're not gonna have any more okay, can we get some land? Well, we're not gonna do that. Okay, well, can we get some institutional power, some money, some capital, some federal bureau of Black people that will be forever in perpetuity looking at our interests? Yeah, we're not gonna give you that either. Well, damn, this is starting to sound like well, I guess we get our freedom,
Yeah, yeah,
air quotes, freedom.
that's right.
This is my long-winded way of saying I think that there needs to be a national federal council of African American studies where our best and brightest govern and maintain the canon, and that teachers don't have to go to Pinterest to find the most authoritative source for what they could be teaching. Right now, teachers who pay teachers and Pinterest are amongst the biggest sources for teachers
Sure.
to get their curriculum. That's sad, first of
Yeah.
all. But it's worse than sad when it comes to our stuff. If you are like, right before February, January 28th, you're scouring and looking for things because this month is coming up or whatnot. First of all, that's
That's
such
right.
a sad thought. That's such a
Look, they're
sad
not
thought.
even doing that. They're recycling the old stuff. They're not even looking for new stuff. It's just like, what do we
Yeah.
have before? Let's get that. Get that.
Same
What did
story,
so-and-so
same
did
four
last
people.
year? That's
Rosa
right.
Parks,
Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King.
That's right. Harriet Tubman.
Harriet Tubman.
And maybe we'll switch that fourth person out. Maybe we'll do somebody different. Maybe we'll do maybe we'll do Whitney Houston this year, or no, or how about we do LeBron James this year? Oh, look, Tiger Woods. Tiger, we like Tiger. Throw Tiger. That's what they do. That's exactly what happens.
Yeah. So what do you think about this idea that we need a federal source that's democratically governed, something closer to what Native Americans got in their bureau? What is theirs called? Like the Bureau of Indian
Affairs, I think
or
that's what
something
it
like
is. Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
They have a cabinet, and they have a cabinet position, right? Deb Hyland, that's who's in that position, I think,
Okay.
if I'm
I
not
didn't have to
mistaken.
notice.
So yeah, so like I no, I agree. I think that I wrote a paper, a thesis paper when I was an undergrad, and the topic was, was it better for Black people to work inside or outside of politics? And so I had to go through this whole thing about, who were the folks that worked on the inside, who were the folks that worked on the outside. And so my consensus those many years ago was that it was imperative for us to have both actors on the inside and actors on the outside. So I say that to say that I do believe we need a sort of space that you speak of, sort of like what Native Americans have, an agency that has funding that is untouched, that have folks that can provide resources throughout all venues and all industries and all domains of society. And then also we should have those independent Black institutions that are controlled by Black people, ran by Black people, funded by Black people, to even push the democratically led institution of Black people itself, right? And I think that's so important. And I think that there's always this binary conversation, like we either have to do one or the other. You got folks that are staunch, we got to work in the system, that's how we do these things, but we know that the system can compromise folks. You got folks that say, oh, we need to be outside of the system and we need to agitate and all those sort of things, but that doesn't give you the ability to negotiate. And I think that it's important that we have both of those pieces. It should never be one or the other. We should always have multiple tools in the toolbox, but we definitely need to have a level of governance space within the frame of the country. And unfortunately, to your point, and I completely agree, we haven't gotten any deal. Some folks may have gotten a raw deal. We have no deal. And so
Our settlement. We had a
no
bad settlement.
We had a bad we got the settlement. The settlement got taken back. They reneged on the settlement. They took it back. So we need that. We deserve that. Folks are fighting for that. I'm all for the fight. And this country will never be what it needs to be until those things happen, until that settlement happens. Honestly, that's the beginning of reconciliation. And without atonement, there is no real reconciliation. Folks want the reconciliation without the atonement, and that's not going to work.
I love this because this, that obviously leads to a conversation about reparations. And I think the problem with reparations, I don't think it's a problem with reparations per se, but so let me frame this the right way. An issue with reparations is the details.
Yeah.
Like, what specifically are you asking for? If it's a check, a blank check, just to write, every African American a bit of money, well, I'm good with that. Just number one.
Yeah, I'm good with that too. I'm perfectly fine with that.
And anybody who says that they're not, I want their check. So it's like just like, listen, you don't have to be like, we don't all have to agree on everything. As a matter of fact,
I'm good with that.
Yeah, give me your piece that you don't want.
That's right.
That you think is like, oh, this would be bad for the country, whatever. Yeah, okay, good. But I think structural power and the sovereignty that Native Americans have is a good goal for us, like to have some kind of institutional power. I want to back up and go to something that we passed over that you just like, you got so many gems in here that like I could just ask you a million questions. But the one that I want to go back to is about the diaspora and diasporic education.
Sure.
So one of the things I said about 1619 is about the limited geography and time frame of what it covers, and globalizing that as being the story or whatever, for me, has some issues because what you said opens up new territory for me. I get to say, no, this is a global project.
That's right.
We exist in many colonized places. These stories that you have of resistance have stories for us to learn from in all these other places. But I noticed that there was someone in the comments who asked about, I think, I don't want to butcher what I thought I saw, but he says, does Rann Miller think he can bridge the gap between continental Africans and Black Americans? Because the gap is there, unfortunately, in the political front that trickles down to the education front too.
Yeah. Oh man, if I had the answer to that, oh, I'd be set. I might be running for something if that was the case. I think that, forgive me for being an educator. Education is the way. I think that there's so much that we don't know about each other. There's so much history that we don't know. There's history of fracture. When we understand, and I'm still learning, so I don't say this as someone who has arrived. When we understand the depths and the levels to the idea of racial capitalism, white supremacy, continental imperialism, intercontinental imperialism, when we see the depths of that, I think that we can understand that our struggles align in many different ways. And I think back to Dr. Du Bois and in his book Black Reconstruction, where he talks about how the proletariat was fractured, the white worker and the Black worker. And that always takes me to an episode of SNL where they did Black Jeopardy, and Tom Hanks was on there, and Tom Hanks is sounding like those Black folks, and everybody's sitting there like, man, now wait a second. And so there's so much that we have in common, and I just bring that back to the diasporic conversation. There's so much that we have in common because we're African people. And from the ways that we move, the clothes that we wear, the food that we eat, and we allow for these political divisions to keep us separate when we ought to see our own collective struggle together. And again, for me, it all comes down to education. We influence each other in so many different ways. I'm reading a book. I forget the title. It's a new book on the Haitian Revolution. And when I was writing resistance stories, I knew some of the history about how the Haitian Revolution influenced folks like Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey, even how some of the Haitians that were in the revolution came and they helped prepare and start out what Vesey was doing and what Nat Turner did and all that other stuff. And I'm like, yo, this is nuts. They don't teach that. I'm like, this is crazy. How couldn't the Haitian Revolution not influence those Black revolutionaries in the United States? There's I gotta get the book. I gotta find the book, but it talks about how what happened in Haiti when the revolution was going on and when the Haitians got their independence. Black people in Philadelphia were like, yes, we need to do that. Those Black people came out their houses and started lighting stuff up and started walking around Philly and were just like, nope, we not having it. We gonna bring Haiti to Philly and we gonna take this over. And then for days they were marching in the streets until they were stopped and stamped down by white violence. And that's just to show that there's so much interconnectivity between us in the diaspora historically. So when people are over here talking about, and I ain't trying to get on no soapbox, but when they're talking about Black Americans of the United States or, you know, traditional Black people, nah, like we're not going to fight and win this fight in isolation. It's not going to work.
So when you
like
say this
that.
last part, you're talking about the push, the ADOS push, the
like
American descendants of slaves,
of slaves and
foundational Black Americans.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
okay.
And I ain't trying to come for nobody per se. I
You
love
better
Black
not, because when them people get your Twitter
listen,
feed.
yeah, I know my stuff's gonna blow up. I love all Black people, but I do think that there's something to be said about like we're not going to win this thing unless we come together. We cannot adopt the ideas of our oppressors. I'm thinking about free air right now. We can't be liberated by using the tools that have oppressed us as a means of liberation. Like getting money and getting rich ain't gonna do it. That don't mean I don't want my reparations check. I'm just saying that we have to think beyond what money can do. And money hasn't been what saved us. What saved us? Community has saved us. Us being together as one collective people with one driven mission has saved us. And that's the only thing that is. And understanding how this world looks, the majority of people in this world are people of color. The majority of people in this world have melanin in their skin. We need each other. It's all interconnective. And those freedom fighters that folks love so much, people love talking about Malcolm. You know, Malcolm worked with folks outside. Malcolm was a Pan-Africanist. You know, Dr. Du Bois, Pan-Africanist. Frederick Douglass. Go down the list of those famous Black heroes that everybody loves to cite and quote. They didn't work in isolation. They understood that our plight was a collective one. And I think that that's the way we have to go now. It can't just be, you know, looking at us from a place of the United States, and that comes with a knowledge and understanding of what our history is.
All right. So you're an educator. You got to help me understand a piece of this, right? Because I have a complex political question that addresses what you just said. So part of it is I'm wondering around when we look at these stories from the past, many of the people that we talk about have an affiliation with either Marxism or socialism. They're either socialist or Marxist. I think it's complicated to treat them as if they are textbook Marxist or socialist and not inventive people who are looking at all the things that are available to us and putting a Black spin or, you know, somehow creating a different spin on all of these other kind of isms like socialism, capitalism, or whatever. We are an inventive people, right? So it's wrong to treat our people as if they're a textbook Marxist or a textbook socialist who are divorced from the Black experience and the Black framing of this.
That's
Here's the question. The political question in this is that there is a strain of socialism and mainstream socialism that I think too many Black progressives gleam onto that starts to feel like a post-racial socialism that is annoyed with anything that looks like it's racial or particular to the Black struggle or Black nationalism or Black kind of Black first thinking or politics, to the point where they poo-poo the uniqueness of the Black kind of oppression and try and make it all economic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's this post-racial socialism, mainstream socialism that
Uh-huh.
is very educated and sometimes damn near like it's some of the it's the most beige black people I've ever seen who are affiliating with the whole Bernie thing and whatever,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which is beautiful until they start getting into this post-racial territory and they start talking down to people who say it's not all economic,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
Help me understand how we make peace with the fact that Paul Robeson and Du Bois and other folks did have an affiliation for Marxism or
Mhm.
socialism or whatnot. Doesn't make them predecessors to
To that
Bernie
movement.
Blacks, to
That's
Bernie
right.
Blacks,
That's right.
right?
That's right. That's right. That's right. So let me say this before I go on. I know remember the name of the book. The book is Fear of a Black Republic by Leslie Alexander. The book is dope. Go get that book. But to answer your question, man, and I know some of the scholars. I love some of the scholars. They're dope people. A friend of mine, we go back and forth all the time because he's more on the class side. I'm more on the race side, but I've kind of edged over a little bit because I believe that it's both.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
I,
Don't
I,
go in.
I I'm not going all the way over. It's not all the way over. I'm in the middle. I'm a moderate. I'm a moderate. Let's put it that way.
Mhm.
I think that you can't. For my folks on that side, I understand that argument. I completely get that argument, right? And I think that there is a point to be made about that. And so my answer really is I'd lean on the work of, say, Cedric Robinson, and again talking about this notion of racial capitalism, and he sort of wades in that water of Marxism, socialism, and those sort of things, and sort of positioning the black radical tradition as something a little bit different than that, and how you can't necessarily frame the black struggle in a purely Marxist or socialist framing. The long and short of it is, you can have all the money in the world, that doesn't, you still black, that doesn't mean that anything of your money changes that. They still spray painted the N word on LeBron James's garage, and LeBron James is rich, that man wealthy, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that we have to understand that two things can be true at the same time. We can have that conversation about economics and sort of the ways in which the elite classes, the white elite, uses the exploitative nature of capitalism to divide people and to make things worse for all of the proletariat, right? And how folks believe that they're capitalists when they're really not capitalists at all because they don't own anything like that. um
They got no capital. They got no capital.
we got no capital. These folks think I'm a capital. It was funny when he's not to veer off, but when these politicians like, I'm a capitalist, I hear Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden, I'm a capitalist and everything. And I'm just like, man, y'all are all right. I ain't even gonna go there. I'll just say this. I think that while those things are true, they're absent a conversation about how race was manufactured in a way to sort of be the apparatus for which all of this works. You can't have one without the other, in my personal opinion. It's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? But we also understand that this race-based violence, this race-based capitalism, right? That's a real thing. And if we're not having that conversation in with the economic piece, then we're really being disingenuous to the plight that our people finds ourselves in, not of our own doing, but it doesn't help us get our way out of where we are. Black capitalism isn't going to save black people. I'm gonna say that one more time. Black
Yeah.
capitalism is not going to save black people. Socialism isn't going to save black people. Marxism isn't going to save it. And I'll also say this: I think the other problem that we struggle with is the idea that we don't have the models necessarily to um, help us figure out how to do what it is that we're looking to do. And I'm not necessarily saying we need the models. Again, reading Leslie Alexander's book, one of the problems or struggles that the Haitians had early on was they were trying to do democracy better than the Americans did it. And I'm not saying that that was necessarily the wrong way to go, but there was a disconnect with who we were, where we couldn't lean on the African ways of governance and how we actually governed one another. One of my favorite scholars, Dr. Greg Carr, he references a legal scholar, student of his, Angie Porter, and she put out this piece on Africana legal frames, a really good journal article. And she talks about, in the midst of that, how Africans govern themselves in terms of a legal grounding, and sort of understanding how American jurisprudence is in juxtaposition with sort of an Africana jurisprudence. And I say that to say that when you're reading that, I'm like, man, you never really think about how African people govern themselves. Like, we think in a certain context, but we don't get in the nitty gritty, and we may not have had that information at our disposal. It, particularly if we're talking about framing what freedom looks like, right? If we need to be freer, what does freedom look like? Does it look like something that we've already seen? Maybe not, because we're still not free. Maybe it looks like something that we've never seen, that we've been detached from. And I just say that to say, I think that all the scholarship is great that we're doing, and the conversations are necessary, and it's wonderful to have. But I think that we ought to think outside the box, understanding economics, and certainly understanding our own history, but being able to say, listen, this race thing was an issue. How do we connect to our past in a way where we can chart a future, doing things the way our people may have done them? That might be something that makes us a bit freer than sort of going down the line of these isms. And the people who created these isms didn't look like us. Maybe we ought to try something, or consider something a little bit different.
I love the way you just said that. We did not create capitalism, socialism, Marxism. All of those things, though, I believe, if you studied them well enough, have traces back to the continent, right? They all would trace back to different political arrangements that there have been in the world. But what we are not free of is the white imagination about what could be in our governance. So we lean on all of the mental frames, including socialism and Marxism and whatever, and then we become team players for those particular those tribes, those particular gangs, those intellectual gangs, and we choose a gang, and then now all of a sudden we're part of the socialist gang, so we have to see the world within that frame, or the Marxist, or the capitalist, or whatever. I think collectivism and communalism for sure will save Black people, and they'll save all people.
Absolutely.
In the long run. Collectivism versus individualism will save all people. It'll save the Chicano. it'll save the northern Mexico tribes, Indian tribes, and the Mexican people, and the global kind of colonized people, whatever. That will save, I think, folks in the long run. That's different, though, than those other isms. Those other isms are political. Economic systems of being. I do want to point out to my friends that, I started this question around, because I think this is an important for one. We won't solve it anytime soon, but we have to keep talking about this, joining these tribes and feeling like now I have to lose my identity in the Bernie crowd, or in the Black conservative crowd, or the whatever. None of that's going to save us. None of that's going to work for us. But I do think that there is something to be said for the work that you are doing, and that you are talking about getting back to the origins of things and going further back, so we can get into the Black imagination about how things could be. Because I think a lot of us carry a lot of anti-Blackness ourselves. I feel like Black people carry a lot of learned anti-Blackness themselves, to where they don't
piss people off today.
Well, they don't have a Black imagination for for anything that we contributed to civilization, because they have been so trained by colonial education for years and years and years and years, that has always excluded the Black imagination about governance and about how things can be. So in a lot of ways, you and I can have this conversation. There could be Black people listening to this who will say they feel like we're just dressing stuff up in dashikis made in China, right? Like for them, that's how fanciful this will sound.
Yeah.
But that's because they have been educated and trained over many years, over generations, to feel that way about the original concepts that we are talking about. I don't know. That's my long-winded way of really thinking that the importance of the work that you are putting on the table, for it to be rigorous for one, for it to be factual and historic basis for two, and for it to reveal windows into into rooms that we have never been allowed to because we've been trained by colonial kind of history to not look in those rooms.
Yeah.
This is where power begins for us. This is intellectual power for us.
And it's okay to not have known, right? To know all the answers at first. This week it comes out, this guy is doing this book on MLK. It comes out that, the thoughts MLK had on Malcolm X were fabricated
Mm,
by Alex Haley. And so if you were like an Alex Haley person, are you going to defend Alex? Well, this is what he had. This is what it said. Oh, he's not here to defend himself. Or you can take the information and say, hey, wow, I didn't realize that there's more that meets the eye. I'm just a firm believer that one, and I'm talking about us now. You gotta love Black people. You
mhm,
can't do any of this if you don't love Black people,
mhm,
because it can't be like, you're wrong, you're this, you're that. You got to do this in love and in service of Black people. It can't be I'm telling you because you this or that. And then second, in love, let's just put the facts out there. Let's investigate together. I don't have a monopoly on history. Certainly, I don't have. I'm just one person leaning on the shoulders of great historians that came before. But like, man, this information is out here. Let's get it. Let's figure it out. Let's find out. And to your point, let that be a window into the Black imagination, that we can see how folks did it before, the realities that have been withheld from us, so that we can chart our course. I'm not saying it's going to look the same, but if we have a framing from some place of our past that we didn't know, we can incorporate that and sort of break down the oppression of our own mind. Dr. Woodson always talked about this idea of us being conditioned. Well, even our conditioning's been conditioned.
mhm.
And it has us to a place where we're getting in these sort of fights without understanding, like, hey, what do we really need to do? And do we even love Black people? That's to your point about this idea of Black people being anti-Black. Are you doing what you do because you love Black folks? You doing what you're doing because you're trying to chide Black folks, trying to
Yeah.
say what's best for Black people? Do you care? It's a lot. There's a lot of work that I think we need to do, and I think that we oftentimes see the overall work, the overarching work that we need to get here, but we don't want to necessarily do the micro work to
Mm.
prepare us to get there. And I think that, my work and the work of other people who are doing amazing things is just trying to etch the sketch, if you will, the macro micro work to get us to that macro solution.
I want to say to you, uh, I've told my story a lot in public oftentimes. It's part of my activist origin story, that my education did not prepare me well. I didn't have a great education. But what I did was I did have a respect for the people who were successful at it, who were having success at it. I was always the person who looked up to people and was like amazed by what they were accomplishing and what they were doing. And part of that was if you were writing books, or if you were, educated, or if you successfully got through school and went to college and all that, that was one of those things where I looked at you and I went, oh man, look at that. Right. Like that used to be a thing for me
Yeah.
in my younger years. And that has carried on. So when I see a you, right, and at your age, having accomplished what you have accomplished and the contribution that you are making, I'm always really interested in number one, your origin story, but two, your arc. Like,
Mm.
where's this going for you? Like, where is this? And it ends with the question of how would you die happy? Like,
Mm.
what will you leave in the world behind that let you know that you used all your faculties to the best of your potential to do what your thing? Like, how would you die happy? So, anyways, there's a lot in there. I don't know what kind of questions I just asked you,
You
but
got, I got three.
curious
I got
yourself.
three questions on
All
it.
right, go ahead. Go ahead.
So,
Because
I'll start quick with the origin story. Like I said, born in Camden, New Jersey, raised Camden, New Jersey, Pensacola, New Jersey. My parents wanted better for me. I'm an only child. They wanted to give me the best opportunities that they could. They put me in parochial school, Catholic school. So I'm Catholic school educated, preschool through high school. And many of the experiences that shaped me to become an educator and to actually put this book together came from there. This isn't to necessarily come for the education I received. I think that I got a decent education, but with respect to history, with respect to being Black, there wasn't that. I owe that education to the spaces that I came up in, those Black governance spaces, the barbershops, the churches, the community centers, the on the front porch of grandmom's house, or so and so and such and such. And, that gave me an awareness of who I was. And when I um, arrived to college, it was just like, okay, go to college, get that education. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was a Cosby Show kid. Is it okay to say Cosby Show? Is that all right?
Cancel.
Cancel, right? Is that okay to say? I watched the Cosby Show as a kid. So, if you grew up in a Black household in the 80s, you're 80s kid, 90s baby, it's like doctor, lawyer. So I thought maybe I need to go to law school. When I graduated from undergrad, I went to law school for a year, realized that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. I was working at a university at the time, Rutgers University, and I was working for a professor, Dr. Gloria Bonilla Santiago. She, gave me an opportunity to work at her school. My graduate school professor, Dr. Gail Brooks, said, "You need to be an educator, a Black woman. You need to be an educator." Went to work for Dr. Santiago's school. It was one of the best things I ever did, being a teacher. When I got there, I said, I'm going to teach everything that I did not learn until I got to college. I had two great Black professors in college, Dr. Wayne Glasker, Dr. Katrina Hazard Donald, taught me a lot of the stuff that I know now, and where to go find new information. And so I'm like, I'm going to do that when I get in this classroom with the love for Black and brown people. And that's what I've been doing since I've been in education. And so, the challenge for me is to just continue to build on that and create new opportunities. It fuels my writing as a freelance writer. It fuels my passion as an author. And if I can answer where my arc is, I would love to carve out space to continue to do more of that work, whether it's in a school, whether it's at a university, whatever. But I see myself as an educator. I am a teacher. That's what I do. Writing, teaching, reading, learning. And to die a happy man, man, that's a tough one. But I will say this. I'll say that the opportunity to write this book, I wrote this book as though I would never get a chance to write a book ever again. When I wrote it, I'm like reading this, I'm talking to my wife, and I'm just looking at her. I'm like, man, I hope these people let me publish this book. They said they wanted this book. I don't know if they're going to let me do it. And she started laughing. And so I just put everything into it. And if I never get a chance to write another book again, I am happy with the work that I was able to do. In the introduction, I talk about where Dr. John Henry Clark met with Arturo Schomburg, and Arturo Schomburg said, you have to find the missing pages of history. If you want to do this work, you need to find all the missing pages of history. And so it's my goal with this to fill some of those missing pages up. And if I were to die tomorrow, I have something. I may not have a whole lot of money. I may not have a whole bunch of this or that, but I was able to leave something behind that hopefully Black folk would be willing to enter into the canon. Something that my children can have, even if they don't hear my voice again, they can hear it through those words, lessons about who they are and where they come from. And it's not a matter of resting on my laurels, but it's a matter of just being proud of the work that I've been able to do. And I think that that's the most important thing. Wherever you are in life, be proud of the work that you're doing. Be proud of what you have going on. And if you're not proud, get proud. Get into doing something that you are proud of. And I just feel like there's few greater gifts in the world than the service that you can give to your people. And being a Black man in America, it's a pleasure to serve Black people in this capacity.
That was like such a beautiful statement. We're gonna capture all of that. We're gonna cut that up into a million clips and just like that is like that's a commencement. Like, so get proud. If you are not if you are not where you are at. So first of all, if you were to die today, what you put into this book lets you know your level set at this moment. If it were to happen today, you have contributed something into the world.
That's right.
Now you're such a young dude that you still have a lot more songs in your violin, but at least you know for this moment, I have done where I'm satisfied enough and proud of what I have delivered into the world.
No regrets, none whatsoever. There's so much I want. Don't get me wrong. I want to do more. There's a lot to do, but if the Lord were to take me home today, I would have no regrets. I contributed something in addition to some of the other things that I've been able to do.
I don't think you know how powerful a statement that is. I don't think you know, I don't know what you know. I just know that I'm sitting here listening to that, and I'm thinking to myself, if we could all say that, it means that we put in some work. We put in something like our passion project. We put in our time into a passion project. And I think a lot of our frustration for a lot of people is that they don't have that yet, but it's in them.
It's in them. It's in everybody. And we don't teach young people from a passion standpoint. What's your passion? What do you love to do? What do you care most about? And help young people figure out, okay, let's look at a career path for you that gives you the ability to, one, achieve that passion, but also create a livelihood for yourself where you cannot be broke doing it, right? You can fuel that passion, fuel your family in a way where you feel satisfied in terms of what you're giving back to society.
I appreciate you so much, brother, for coming on today.
Oh man, likewise. I appreciate the invite.
For our listeners and learners, that last part, so everything in this last part of what Rann said, I think we're gonna recover this. There are gems in there, so many. This last part too about the passion work. Sometimes I think passion is a euphemism for, or an analogy, or I don't know what it is. It's one of them things where one thing means the other. I think passion is a euphemism for broke for a lot of people, but it doesn't have to be. A lot of your passion can lead to an occupation. It could lead to vocation in the world. I want everybody to know that this is the book. So we've been talking today with Rann Miller. He is the author, in addition to being an educator, and to if you look up Rann Miller and Urban Mixtape, a prolific writer in blogs and articles and in other places, including I think he even wrote for us before, Ed Post, and The Progressive and other places and other outlets. But this is his book, Resistance Stories from Black History for Kids, inspiring people and events that every kid should know. And it includes stories about Rosa Parks, the Black Panther Party, One Marie Judge, Martin Luther King Jr., and others. It also does something that I love, which we talked about in the show today, was it doesn't start our story with our bondage. It starts our story before bondage, because that is the true place to start our story. And I love it. So everybody, listen, we support Black authors and Black books. Run out and get this one. It's reasonably priced, but I will say this. I tweeted out this morning, and Mr. Miller, you may not be, you want to talk about choosing violence in the morning. We give away a lot of books at Ed Post, start book clubs, and support Black authors, because I want to always be somebody who gives back to the folks that are doing this work that you're doing for us, right? There are small ways in which we can support, right? And one is buying the books when you buy them. But a lot of our books about us, for us, by us, are very expensive. And I don't know what's behind that. It's crazy.
I'm not sure either. I've spent a pretty penny in my day getting some stuff from us, by us, for us. But I'm glad that this is reasonably priced. And I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out our brother Sharif El Mekki, who is with us in spirit. Just thinking of him and his folks. So I got to come back on. So Sharif is on. So you got to write me back. You got to bring me back.
You have an open invitation to come, and for people listening and watching, Sharif El Mekki is not with us this week. He is tending to ancestors this week, and we will have him back again next week. He'll be back with us. And he was sad that he was going to miss this particular show because he wanted to be here with you today. So
that's okay. Another good week. I'm coming back.
You're coming back. You got an open invitation, brother. Appreciate you and all the work that you're doing for the friends and family who watch this entire show. Thank you so much, number one, for giving us your time on a Friday in the morning when you can be doing many other things. We appreciate that. We also always remind you that these shows pick up much more traction after the time, because not everybody can make it on a Friday. So please share the show. Like it, share it, send it to friends and family and to others. Let's spread the word. We want to have communal learning opportunities. We want to defend the Black canon. We want to create our own spaces like this to have conversations that matter about the important works that we should all be sharing, the important stories about ourselves we should be sharing with each other. As always, this has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you're freer after an hour with Rann Miller and me. We appreciate you as always. We'll see you next week, and do your best to get some self-care time this week.